This is Floss Weekly, episode 763, recorded Wednesday, December 27th. Fedora fixes everything. Hey, this week Dan Lynch joins me, and we talk once again with Neal Gompa about Fedora, KDE, HDR, Wayland, Pipewire, and lots more. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Well, good morning, or good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, whatever time you are. It's Floss Weekly, and that's the free Libre and open source software podcast. We're back, and with me today is Dan the Man, Mr. Method Dan, the original Linux outlaw, Dan Lynch. Hey, how are you, sir?
Hey, thank you very much. Great to be here, Jonathan. I want you to introduce me whenever I walk into a room. That was awesome. It's like, you could just be like a hype man or something.
That's
working, great. Yeah,
I'm working on it. It's
cool.
The second time back in the big chair, and I'm going to be the guy going forward. So I've been thinking about that when I'm laying awake at night, unable to go to sleep. It's like, all right, what can I do to introduce the show? How am I going to introduce Dan? So
cool. That was great. Do you wake up in the night and jump up with your notepad and go, "I've got it"?
No,
I've got it.
No, I'm not that. Okay. No, I'm not that dedicated.
By Jove, he's got it.
So, our guest today is once again Neal Gompa, and Dan, you were able to listen to a little bit of last week's episode. Were you able to finish it? Get to the end?
Yeah, I heard all of it. Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
I listened to the whole thing. It was a great episode. I enjoyed it a lot.
It was great. Now, last week we were going to talk about KDE and Fedora. And some other things, because Neal is the KDE guy at Fedora. From what I understand, we'll have him give us the exact details on that here in just a second. So we had this grand plan. We were going to talk about KDE 6, maybe talk about HDR, Pipewire, Fedora, and even this sort of... I saw a blog post, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it was talking about... It's talking about how Wayland breaks everything, and no, Wayland is the new cool thing, and in fact, you have this stack of Wayland and Pipewire, and there was one more piece of it that the author was making the point that this is the new stack, but it's different than the old one, so it's going to take some time for people to get on it. And I don't know, maybe we'll talk about that with Neal as well. Let's not waste any more time. I know he is raring to get into the conversation. Let's go ahead and bring him on. Neal, welcome back, sir.
Hey! It's fun to be back again.
Yes, it is.
Hey, and it was sooner than 11 years.
Yes. From 11 years down to 1 week. I think the math there suggests...
Not even 11 days.
Yeah. I think the math there suggests that you'll have to be back on before the time we finish the episode. So this is your life now.
Yeah. This is where you meet yourself at the end of the episode in some time travel thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm a movie-in at heart, so let's go.
There you go.
Makes sense. So, hey, let's talk about Fedora this time. Let's not talk about any of the other stuff. Let's talk about Fedora. What do you do at Fedora, Neal?
Let's see. I think the thing I'm most known for is that I am the chair / leader, whatever you want to call it. I'm the chair of the Fedora KDE Special Interest Group, which means that I am responsible for the strategy and roadmap and the success of the Fedora KDE experience, and that also includes its deliverables, which includes the Fedora KDE Spin, that is with the regular Fedora stuff, and Fedora Kinoite, which is the atomic desktop variant. In addition to this, I also work with the other special interest groups related to, say, ARM, to support Fedora KDE on ARM and things like that, and make sure that we have a good experience there. In addition to the stuff I do with Fedora KDE, I'm involved in Fedora Cloud, working on being able to support the experience of Fedora Linux and cloud providers. That includes VPSs like Linode and DigitalOcean and Vultr and all these others, as well as the quote-unquote brand name / traditional / whatever you want to call it, cloud providers like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, IBM Cloud, and others, right? So like you go to the top, and also we go into the mid-range and the low end, and we try to provide a good experience for those in there. And I'm more of an implementation guy. I don't really do the leadership part of Fedora Cloud, but I'm involved in like making the tooling work, implementing things to improve the experience and engaging with people to kind of solicit their needs and wants and try to better that experience. I'm also involved in Fedora Workstation, which is providing the GNOME-based experience for Fedora Linux. From there, I'm a member that gives feedback, solicits, and tries to help with implementing stuff, things of that nature. Let's see. I'm also involved in some of the language stuff, supporting Rust and Python and Go and PHP and all these other things. And so, like, it's an easier question to ask of what I'm not involved in Fedora. And I guess at this point, what I'm not involved in Fedora really is, I guess, like some of the promotional stuff, the marketing stuff per se. I don't do a whole lot of that. I can, but like I'm already doing all this other stuff. So, like,
you sound fairly busy.
Yeah. And so a lot of this is, so I do a lot of this stuff across basically desktop, cloud, server, IoT device type things like embedded SBCs and ARM devices, which kind of led into how I created the Fedora Asahi SIG to create the Fedora Asahi Remix, which provides the experience for Apple Silicon Macs and is now the official platform for Apple Silicon Mac, Linux on Apple Silicon Macs from the Asahi Linux project, which was, that was just brand new last week.
That is in and of itself pretty impressive. So there's two things there that I don't know a whole lot about. The first one is Fedora Atomic Desktop with Kinoite. What exactly do we mean when we say an atomic desktop?
So there's been contention about how we want to describe this because it's not a very easy thing to do. I know you may have probably heard people talk about the immutable operating system stuff, right? Like, and the idea is that the operating system software is essentially read-only and only explicitly able to be changed by specific direct actions, such as if you call the system manager to install a package or overlay a container or rebase to a new version or whatever. But like software in and of itself can't automatically change things around it. The word immutable is not a good description of this because your system can still change. It's just discrete actions that have like controlled side effects. So in a normal Linux system environment, when you run an application, it can write stuff into var, it can do things in temp, it can edit files in home, it can do things it could, in theory, if it has the privileges, it could modify files in etc and stuff like that. The phrase that I would like to use that is not going to be popular and most people aren't going to get it is anti-hysteresis. Now, the concept of hysteresis is the idea that when you bend or change things, that they stick. Anti-hysteresis is the opposite. When you bend and change things, they snap back. Think of like a rubber band. Hysteresis is the property in which it holds the shape and form based on that. And a rubber band is naturally going to do the opposite of that. But as you wear it down, the rubber band stretches more and more, and it gains a new memory of this. This is also like if you think about memory foam. That is actually hysteresis. That sort of thing is a more accurate way to describe this. Another way to describe this is freely reprovisionable. Like you can, every time you provision it, it is the same thing as the last time you provisioned it. It's the same time as the next time you provisioned it. And you can distinctly plan and understand each state of the system based on that. So it's fully reprovisionable and fully reproducible. So all these different words, right, don't fully explain the concept of this. So we just go with atomic. And because it was an old brand that Fedora used like 7 or 8 years ago to refer to this concept of using RPM OS tree as the foundational system software management tool as opposed to DNF. And instead of managing just individual packages, you're managing the whole system as a discrete atomic unit. So an atomic update, an atomic transaction, an atomic modification, hence the atomic system. And so Fedora Atomic was a brand that we revived to describe these class of systems just earlier in the year. And so Fedora Kinoite, a lot of people would describe as immutable. The new go forward phrase for this is we're calling it an atomic desktop.
Now, does it use some of the tricks that these sorts of distros have in the past? You know, like no root user, read only root partition. Does it have those sorts of things built in?
Yeah. So as part of the RPM OS tree setup, if you were, root user or not is actually a user customization thing. That's whatever you want for that. But by default, we usually don't provision a root user. But the root file system is read-only for all intents and purposes by default. From the default user experience perspective, you can't modify it. But if you use the rpm-ostree tree command to go quote unquote unlock the root file system, you could write to it. Or if you overlay packages or install stuff at the system level, like maybe you need to install a driver, you can overlay it on there. That is a controlled change to the root file system. For that change alone, it's read-write, and then everything else afterwards, and before and after, is read-only. So it makes the change what's called, in mathematical terms, discrete. It is a unit in itself that is fully encapsulated, a discrete change.
And I'm assuming it's fully reversible too, for it to really live up to this idea. Yeah. Now,
that's the idea.
Is Kinoite actually suitable for running a desktop? Is that really what it's for? And would it drive me crazy?
The answer to both of those questions is yes.
Of course.
So Fedora CoreOS is the cloud server-ish version of this, and it's the headless experience that provides you this reprovisionable atomic environment. So Fedora CoreOS is what you want if you want a headless server-based experience. Fedora Kinoite provides you Kinoite. I think I just spelled that right offhand. I'm good. So Fedora Kinoite provides you essentially that experience that Fedora CoreOS provides, but it gives you a desktop environment to go with it, and that being KDE Plasma. And KDE Plasma, has, for example, Plasma Discover as its graphical software manager, and that has an integration with rpm-ostree, so it can manage your system upgrades and present them to you in a user-friendly fashion. Now, with anything that uses rpm-ostree in this model, the intent is that you primarily use containerized applications on this environment. So that means you're using Flatpaks for graphical applications, and you're using Podman or Toolbox for server applications and command line tools, respectively. So that's kind of the idea. Then Silverblue, Fedora Silverblue, is the GNOME counterpart for this. And then, I think recently we launched Fedora Onyx, which is the budgie desktop version of this. And so, there are other variants, and oh yeah, Saracea is the Sway version of this. So, I said Saracea right on the first try. I usually screw that one up because I don't actually know that word. I practiced, and it worked. But yeah, so we have these different variants that you can use to provide this for these different experiences. And the idea is that these are predictable environments. These are also effectively locked down environments. You are essentially operating in a reduced interaction experience for the purposes of, because that's how there are two ways to make something more reliable when it comes to a computer system. The first way is to be able to capture any arbitrary change and be able to reset. That's boot to snapshot, like openSUSE does. The second way is to compose the environment in a fashion that is discrete and locked down, and then make it so that there's a separation of concerns for everything that the user does, so that it's trivial to diagnose where the differences are. And that's the second approach. That's what Fedora Atomic does. And so that's Fedora CoreOS, that's Fedora Kinoite, that's Fedora Silverblue, that's Onyx, Voxite, and so on. I don't know if Voxite's a thing, but it might be.
But it should be.
Well,
That sounds really cool. I'm curious about the kind of use cases for this. So who's using this and what are they using it for? It feels like it'd be good for like labs and stuff if you needed to fire up. You want 10 desktops, you want them to wipe it, you want to wipe them at the end, you want a fresh set for the next class or something. What do people do with them?
So I think the current users right now are people who are very, the phrase is cloud native that a lot of people like to use. But I'm going to just say people who like containers a little too much. If they use containers back and forth for pretty much everything, and they're not really doing a whole lot in the system itself, then this is a great setup because it kind of plays to that model. If you are, however, but what I personally view this as useful for is those lab environments, those libraries, those schools, school things, where necessarily you need a way to reset everything to a working condition like that, because you don't know what that user is going to do, and you probably want to have defensive computing environment. I have been a TA or a side-along admin to far too many computer labs to know that they should, to even believe that a wide open computer on a computer lab is a good idea.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I see those also, furthermore, like kiosks or cafes. I know net cafes aren't really a thing in North America, but they're much more common in, say, in Europe, Eastern Europe, and in Asia. And these would be appropriate for those environments too. So that's where I see these really being successful in those environments where there is no expectation that the user is supposed to manage the machine or supposed to understand the machine, and the machine needs to be able to survive whatever the user does to it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds very, very cool. We've actually got a listener question from Ken McDonald, who wants to know how does Fedora Core compare to Ubuntu Core?
Okay, so Fedora Core OS and Ubuntu Core. Ubuntu Core is essentially, you take the same model you do with regular Fedora, but you make it coarser in terms of what your componentization levels are. So in a traditional Fedora environment, you have RPMs, and they describe every little component that you're actually building into it. In Ubuntu Core, you have the snaps, and snaps are groups of software to create a functional component. So, for example, if you were to say, I want to have a Wayland kiosk. Well, if you were to do it with an RPM land, you would have, I would install maybe Cage or Mir Kiosk or GNOME Kiosk or Quinn directly. But then I would also install the wrapper tool to actually invoke them correctly. And I would also set up the config files for those and to make them run. And then I would install the session stuff and the program that I'm going to run in the kiosk. And those are all separate actions that you do. Whereas if you were in the Ubuntu Core Snap world, it's coarser. So you have maybe a Mir Kiosk Snap or a Quinn Kiosk Snap that actually includes all the components to run it as that application. So it'll include the libraries, it's basically like application bundles. And then maybe you have your application and its runtime in another snap, and that includes all the components around it. And then you connect the two to make it so that one can use the other as its runtime environment. So you have less composition, but you still have composability. But it also behaves a little bit more like a traditional system because you're not actually generally creating a true read-only single atomic environment. You're still creating these components and assembling them together to create your environment. They're just, instead of being fine-grained down to the individual projects themselves, it's more to functional groups that wrap up into a bundle. Now, Now, you can, of course, implement read-only root file systems and factory resets and all this other fun stuff on top, but you can also do it with a traditional Fedora system too, right? Like boot to snapshot. You could say every time you make a mutation, take a snapshot with ButterFS, make that snapshot show up in the boot menu. If it doesn't actually work, then roll back to the previous snapshot, then purge the thing, and then keep on moving on with your life. In Ubuntu Core, every snap gets installed as a parallel snap. The snap creates a boot entry, and then it initializes the environment. And in the event that doesn't work, then you roll back to the old one, and then you deinstall the new snaps and go back.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. That's a really good explanation. Thank you for that. Really, really. I hope Ken appreciate that one.
A long time ago, I worked on Snap stuff too. So that's why.
Is there anything you haven't worked on? Yeah. You seem to have worked on almost everything, which is great. One thing I want to ask about. I'm an audio guy. I love audio stuff. I'm an audio engineer, and I've been looking into Pipewire because I don't know much about Pipewire. I kind of use Jack at the moment, and
then you should be using Pipewire for sure.
There we go. So this is your opportunity to explain to me why do I need Pipewire, and maybe just for people who don't know, what is Pipewire and why would I want it? Why do I need it?
Pipewire, to put it bombastically, obsoletes Pulse Audio and Jack completely. You don't need anything else except for the Pipewire. Now, to put it more technically, Pipewire is a multimedia subsystem, a user space multimedia framework that implements a subsystem in which you can have a semi-interactive model of manipulating the paths in which audio and video move around in your system. So underneath all of it is it provides a node graph for both video and audio going through your system. Just like what Jack does for audio. I mean, the patch bays and the redirections and all that stuff. It's a node graph underneath, and Pipewire implements the same thing. The thing that makes Pipewire special and interesting is that it extends it beyond audio to video, to screencasting, and all this other, and cameras, and these things. And so you can do all kinds of fancy redirections with that, with the same benefits that you get from Jack. And as of Pipewire 1.0, all of the latency controls, the real-timeness, all that stuff, and the full Jack API is now completely done in Pipewire. So there's you can think of Pipewire, and this is not an official statement by anybody, but you can think of Pipewire as Jack 3.
It is now. No.
Yeah. But you can think of Pipewire kind of like a Jack 3 because because it essentially takes everything Jack did and subsumes it into something that is broadly usable, and it incorporates Pulse Audio's capabilities and its auto configuration features. So now now it makes Pro Audio approachable. Before Pipewire, in order to set up, this as an audio engineer, but for the benefit of the audience, in order to do Pro Audio, you basically need to bridge two audio servers together, get the priorities set for processes such that they are operating high enough that you don't have buffer underruns or overruns that cause skipping and pops and bursts and stuff like that. And you need to make sure all of the inputs and outputs are redirected to one audio server, because if they're going across two audio servers in the end, then it becomes extremely difficult to pipeline it for audio production. So Pipewire simplifies this by incorporating the feature sets of both Pulse Audio and Jack into one system, so you get that property by default, and it means that every single client, whether it's Pipewire client or a Pulse Audio client, an ALSA client, an ESD client, or a Jack client, they will all come into the single Pipewire node graph, and you can just do whatever you want with it.
I have a feeling that Paul Davis and Robin Garris would like to have some words with you about Jack 3.
They were involved. I don't know.
They have been, and in fact, those are two of the guys behind Ardor. For those of you that aren't and up on who your favorite developers are, and they have over the years been sort of cautiously optimistic about Pipewire. The last statements I've seen from them, they're basically of the opinion that, okay, it's here, it's going to stay. This is probably what everyone is going to be using 4 or 5 years from now. So, yeah, it's pretty good, we guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's quite a big admission from them.
Well, Paul Davis, Paul Davis worked with Wim Taemans
Yes.
on the design of Pipewire for Pro Audio in the first place. So, like, this was all done with the understanding that we would eventually have everything unified.
Right.
So, and I think we're here.
Well, almost. There is at least one use case that I know of that Pipewire just completely falls on its face for, and that's FFADO. It's technically in there, but when Wim Taeman's comment on it is basically, I don't actually have any of the hardware to test with, so this probably isn't going to work.
I think that's fair, because FireWire-based audio devices are pretty rare now.
Yeah,
They are, but at the same time, there were some glorious devices that were made. I happen to have a Sapphire Pro 40 just sitting over there, not really plugged into FireWire because it's broken. But then on the other hand, you can get such good USB devices these days that it's kind of a, unless you have $20,000 invested in these FireWire devices, just go get a USB, spend a couple $100, go get a USB device, and it'll be great.
I think I will make the possibly dangerous statement that if you were still using FireWire for your audio production today, I would seriously consider upgrading to a USB 3 or a USB 4 based audio production system. And that is for two reasons. One, it is bloody hard to get FireWire interface cards now. They are not easy to find. And two, you're just going to have better support for everything, anyway, with these things. And USB latency is as the same level, if not better, than FireWire when you're operating at the highest protocol level. So if you got the newest stuff that's using like USB 3.2 Gen 2, you're probably gonna be fine. Because at that point you're pushing raw PCIe over USB.
Yeah.
So like you can't get faster than that.
I guess I might need to pick up one of those new devices because I think all the audio equipment I have, I think is still USB 2. And
really?
I think so.
I mean, this microphone here is USB 2, but I also don't do anything fancy with it, so I don't care.
Right.
But if you're doing like mixer board and stuff, you might want to look at either Thunderbolt or USB 3 or USB 4 stuff. You might have better luck with Thunderbolt because it is a more raw protocol, and you'll get and things will be a little the bandwidth and lower latencies are more guaranteed.
I don't.
But again, it's as long as it's USB-C and Thunderbolt, then it's also USB 4 at that point. So it's the same thing.
Those streams have kind of merged.
Thank goodness for that.
Yes.
I am actually getting very tired of having lots of different connectors and trying to figure it out. Having one connector and trying to figure out what its usability is a different story and a different problem. But it is a problem I'm willing to have over trying to find cables for like 10 different connectors.
So I forget who it was, but somebody I follow over on X, over on Twitter, had this brilliant idea. Let's write a little program that will run, and then you could take your USB-C to C cable and plug it into two different ports on your laptop. It'll detect it and tell you the capabilities of the cable. I need this.
That is actually cool.
I need this. Yes.
I need this. I need this in my life.
Absolutely.
It is actually really hard to figure out what these things can do because sometimes they just don't tell you. It's worse. Sometimes the manufacturer doesn't even know,
or they're not entirely honest about it.
A lot of times they don't know because
true.
the chips get swapped as part of production shortages or supply chain differences. So I know of at least one vendor that was halfway through our production we used chip A, and this had XYZ features, and then they switched to chip B because chip A stopped being available for production, but the model still was being sold.
Right.
And chip B only had X and Y feature, but not Z. And they didn't know, and no one was going to be able to find out because this stuff is not detailed. I have read some of these private data sheets that people have for these USB chips. They are not good.
So let's move away from audio for a minute. And boy, there's a lot more that we could talk about. We were talking before the show about Pipewire doing video and the support for it in OBS and how everyone that has ever used the OBS virtual V4L2 loopback plugin is just, we're waiting for delivery from on high when OBS will finally be able to do Pipewire output. which is it's coming right soon.
Yeah,
Maybe?
I think, so like OBS 30 just went out the door, so that means that I think they're going to actually prioritize getting this done for OBS 31. I want to say that that's coming with that. Again, I have no idea. I'm not like a real developer in that project. I'm not. I just kind of contribute to it and try to make things work on Fedora.
Yes.
That's all I really do. But like I do keep track of what's going on in there, and I think that the Pipewire stuff is the camera portal in particular is I think at this point just waiting for people to test it, and then then they may actually start looking at landing it. So there's also a rework that I think happened 2 weeks ago. There's a bunch of stuff going on, but I'm hoping it'll land progressively at the beginning of the new year, and we will actually be able to have it for the next OBS version. I'm crossing my fingers for it because I would really like to not have to deal with V4L2 loopback, not just because it's annoying in itself to get set up and working, but I have a very weird quirk with V4L2 loopback is it keeps becoming my default camera, and I don't want it to be.
Yeah.
And I can't make it stop. It doesn't. It wants to be the first camera, and like in particular, Firefox is perfectly happy to always pick the first camera, and so it's not pleasant having to fix that.
Yeah, I can believe that. Sounds very typical. So let's talk for a minute, or maybe more than a minute, about KDE. And specifically KDE 6. Now, the background for this is that I've been watching KDE 6 development for a long time. And one of the things I got really excited about was back when Xaver, I forget his last name, but his first name's Xaver. Huckle, thank you. Started talking about making HDR work and, finally getting HDR to fire up, the KDE output to fire up HDR on something capable of it. And at that point, I went out and spent more money than I probably should have on a 42-inch OLED TV. So that's
my gosh.
That is my monitor behind me is an LG 42-inch OLED, which
no wonder you want HDR to work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I would want HDR to work if I spent that much money.
Well, thankfully, it wasn't actually too bad. It was south of 1,000. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
So it's now. I am running Fedora 40 Rawhide on the desk, the workstation behind me, not on the laptop. I guess I really should admit we're running Pop!OS on this laptop because it's
that's okay. I thought you were going to say Windows for a minute. That would be a real admission.
That would
be like we're all hanging up on you.
I have Windows virtual machines. That's about the only Windows I have these days. No, so it's the HP Dev one. It came with Pop!OS, and I'm actually, except for the power battery issue every once in a while, I'm perfectly happy with that. But desktop behind me, Fedora 40 from Rawhide, which, here be dragons, it'll eat your babies and all of that. It's actually not been too bad. And so Neal and I were actually in the same Matrix room talking about Fedora KDE stuff. And I think it was last night that we kind of started bugging you. I was like, Neal, why are you not running Rawhide yet on any of your machines?
Oh, I'm running them on my machines, just not this one.
I had the thought about telling you then. I'm like, dude, if you want to do this, wait until after the show. Don't break your recording, your production machine until after we finish interviewing you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that was yes. The way I have one laptop here that has it.
Yeah.
And that one runs Rawhide. I have an HP Dev one that runs Fedora KDE on it as well.
Yeah.
And it goes actually back and forth between running KDE Plasma 6 and 5 using boot to snapshot.
Oh.
And I have a Lenovo laptop that runs Fedora Workstation, so I can check out what's going on the GNOME side. Mm-hmm. And I have 2 mini PCs that run Rawhide Fedora KDE, and I have a couple of virtual machines on different hypervisors. One's on VMware Fusion, and another one is on GNOME boxes to check how things are going for those environments.
So, what is up with KDE 6 coming first to Fedora. I thought Fedora was supposed to be a GNOME flagship.
How dare you? How dare you? I know that the website gives the impression that GNOME is the only desktop, but we're here too. And actually, in all seriousness, Fedora KDE is actually release blocking, just like Fedora Workstation is. Both desktops are required to be fully functional and passing the testing criteria in order for a Fedora release to go out. So,
I seem to remember back, this has been several years ago now, there being some scuttlebutt about Fedora really having trouble with its KDE desktop, and it seemed like one or two people that were working on the team ejected and left, and there was sort of a lurch. How long has that been? And it sounds like we have recovered from that situation.
that was 8 years ago.
That was a long time ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was 8 years ago. I know what you're talking about. There was a particular contributor who
Did a lot, it seems like.
he did a lot, and he flamed out over the transition from KDE 4 to Plasma 5. And because of the transition from KDE 4 to Plasma 5, the number of components that make up the KDE Plasma experience, the KDE desktop experience overall, I think it went up like twofold, it 2 to 3-fold, because it went from like 100 some packages, 100, 200 packages to like 400.
Oh,
so
well, goodness.
Yeah, so like the Fedora KDE experience, I think when we just landed beta 2 on Christmas Day, in Rawhide, that was 322 packages. Source packages, binary packages that produce way more.
Oh yeah,
it's easily like I don't know, double, triple.
Yeah, maybe 1,000
more.
Yeah.
Easily 600.
Yeah. 600,
700 of them. But like the source packages, it was almost 400. That's not even with all of the KDE gear being ported to KDE 6 yet. This is just the stuff that's already been ported. There's still more to go. Yeah. So the KDE ecosystem is very big.
Yes.
And consequently, the Fedora KDE SIG is very large. I think it's actually one of the largest special interest groups in Fedora now, because we have 5-6 active contributors who work on the packaging and delivery and upstream work, for upstream and KDE work for this. And we are significantly more active. I mean, from my view, being in all the SIGs that I'm in, we're significantly more active than most of the other special interest groups. And we do a lot upstream in KDE project as well as downstream in Fedora, and further downstream for EPEL for CentOS and RHEL users, because Fedora KDE SIG also maintains the KDE Plasma experience for the enterprise Linux user base.
Oh.
Makes sense. So every KDE major version change from starting way back when we went from 3 to 4 has been legendary for one reason or another.
Yeah. So I don't know. 5 to 6 hasn't actually been all that crazy.
Well, so I would say 5 to 6, at least the way it's shaping up so far, is going to be legendary for how smooth and how good it is.
Yeah, so I threw on the Plasma Alpha on one of my laptops, and I was sad that everything worked because I kind of expected for there to be more broken and like something interesting to happen or whatever. No, the only thing I got was a random crash that happens when I shut down the computer, and that was just like a logic error that got fixed like a couple weeks later, and it's just like, well, okay. So it's been super smooth. I think a lot of people were worried that the transition from Qt 5 to Qt 6 and the switch from X11 by default to Wayland by default was going to be extremely painful and experience breaking. But because Fedora switched to Wayland by default, I think a large part, and because Fedora switched to Wayland by default in Fedora 34,
a long time ago,
there's been a lot of real world pounding of the Wayland experience, and it's been solid, and it's really informed how they have evolved, Qt for Wayland as well as KDE Plasma for Wayland, and that's made KDE Plasma 6 a really rock solid experience so far. I mean, I have trouble making the Plasma betas fail in crazy ways, or any way at all, really. And it's good. Like, I'm really happy to see that it's like a smooth, reliable process. There have been definitely some regressions and bugs, and those are being worked out.
Sure.
But like, it's overall been a very solid experience so far, and I'm very, very happy with the progress that has been made on there. And I'm looking forward to, I think it's in 2 weeks, we're going to get the Plasma release candidate. And I'm hoping that it won't take us a week to land it this time, because we'll have all had all the kinks worked out that we can just hit and go. So overall, I would say that I think the way you characterize Plasma 6 is it's a non-event for it's going to be a non-event for a lot of people. It's special because it's a major version break, and there's definitely things that are changing as part of it, because a lot of deprecated stuff's being removed, a lot of stuff that no longer works is being removed without people feeling bad about doing it.
Yeah. Your KWin scripts may be broken until somebody gets around to fixing them. Stuff like that.
Yeah, the APIs and ABIs are all changing. It's basically been used as an opportunity to clean house and to rationalize a bunch of things, which I think is a good thing to do.
Needs to happen.
You should absolutely be able to do that. Like for KDE Plasma 5, for about half of its life cycle, we had 2 frameworks for hotkeys and global shortcuts, and they both did different things. So that's not great.
No.
So in KDE Plasma 6, we have only one, and the functionality that was missing has been gradually added to that framework. So we have one global shortcut framework, and things like better Wayland support, compositor survivability, like the ability for the desktop to crash and the applications to stick around. That's a feature that the KDE folks developed for the entire Wayland ecosystem and contributed patches up and down the stack to make that work. And so in KDE Plasma, if the compositor dies, your applications don't go with it, and the desktop will restart gracefully.
It's amazing.
That's a huge deal because even today, that doesn't happen on GNOME.
Yeah.
Oh, shots fired.
Well, they have a single process architecture. It's a lot harder for them to pull this off.
Oh, he's redeemed himself.
Yeah, I know why they can't do nice things sometimes. It's hard for them.
So what's new in KDE 6? What are you excited about that you think people are going to be, enjoying on KDE 6? From a user point of view.
Good question. I think the most exciting thing is going to be the usability touch-ups that have been done throughout the entire thing. It's not a single application or feature, but another thing that's been done is that we've been cleaning house on the theming and the user experience around that, and trying to make it more coherent. Because, again, through Plasma 5, we introduced this Kirigami and QML stuff that came in midway through the life cycle. And so you have applications that are in one framework or in another framework, and while they are still going to be applications that are either QML or Qt widgets, which is either written in C++, Qt widgets being C++, and QML being QML, which is a whole declarative way of writing UIs. In Plasma 6, there's been a concerted effort to unify the look and feel between the two types. And that's a big deal because people would notice that things would be subtly different or a little wonky or weird. And that unification is really valuable to make people feel like even the applications that are within the desktop shouldn't feel alien to the desktop itself, right? And there's been this concerted effort to do that. And then things like improving the compositing and the renderers, like, preliminary support for Vulkan rendering and all this other stuff. Like, a lot of this is under the hood or behind the scenes or touch-up kind of improvements. I outside of the fact that we're Wayland by default, and I don't think the user is going to notice a lot. Well, okay, there is one visible change. It's the floating panel thing. I have gone back and forth on the floating panel thing. I don't actually know how to feel about it. At first, I was really excited about it, and then actually seeing it in action has made me have some mixed feelings about it. I don't know how I feel about it yet. It's not horrible,
if nothing else, it's about a 2 mouse clicks to change it too. It's trivial to change it back.
Okay.
It's distinct. That's what I'll say.
There you go.
It is a very distinct way to make the panels look.
Sometimes you got to make a decision. It's like when you get an actor like Nick Cage makes a lot of decisions, apparently, in his very distinct way of doing things. Yep. If you can change it, though, that's cool. You can, customize it very quickly back to how you want it.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the big change in Fedora 40, and that is Fedora 40 is pretty much going to be Wayland only. Like, is X11 shipping at all as part of Fedora 40?
X11 will still remain in the distribution because there are other desktops that need it.
That still need it.
But but in Fedora KDE, we have not had X11 in our hot path for 2 releases now anyway. So like all the testing and qualification, X11 hasn't been a requirement. We have, with Fedora 40, we're making a big push because Plasma 6 and Fedora 40 at the same time, like, there is no such thing as a good time to rip that Band-Aid off. It's going to suck no matter when you do it. And my gut feel, and based on what I've seen before in other places, that people generally they're not happy about it, but they're more accepting of it when it happens at the major version boundary.
That's fair.
If I have to change this later at a minor version afterwards, people are like, "Why are you doing this? You shouldn't be. You're breaking my computers at a Semver minor thing. Never mind." That this is not Semver managed. For those who don't know, Semver is semantic versioning. It has this whole scheme of like the first number in the thing is supposed to indicate when you do breaking changes. The second number is supposed to be additive changes. And the third number is supposed to be just bug fixes. Nobody really follows Semver truly.
No,
but
you really can't.
But people complain about it, so it's just like, fine. We will make this big heaping change at the Semver major, even though it doesn't matter, and it is not how any of this works.
Now, just to be clear, we're still going to have X Wayland. Your X apps are still going to work.
Yeah, X applications will absolutely work. The X Wayland, the X Wayland integration is in place and fully functioning. Like, I have applications that are X11 applications that I have to use.
We will probably have X Wayland and X applications around for another decade. Let's be honest, probably another decade.
Oh, easy, yeah.
Easy 2 decades.
Yeah.
Because, like, you got to think about those line of business applications that the developers are long gone and nobody has the source code anymore, but everybody relies on them.
Yep.
Oh boy, there's a lot of those.
Yep.
And those need to work. And so I think we're stuck with X Wayland forever, unless somebody re-implements Xlib as something that can speak Wayland natively. And so then applications just don't talk to an X server because the Xlib doesn't need an X server. I mean, until that happens, that's whatever. That's
kind of what Pipewire did to get rid of Pulse Audio and Jack. I mean, there's a precedent there.
Well, also the Haiku folks are doing this. They created one of the Haiku developers created something called xlib, which is Xlib emulation, and it emulates the X11 library API so that GTK can run natively in the Haiku rendering path on Haiku OS. So it proves that that's technically possible.
Yeah.
Because they are doing it. So I suspect that the only way X Wayland goes away is if that happens. And if nobody ever invests in doing that for a Linux environment, for a Wayland environment, then we're just never going to see it. And we'll have X Wayland forever, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah. So I know of at least one case where X Wayland is sort of the savior, and this is maybe weird. No, maybe you're probably familiar with this problem actually. Global shortcuts, global hotkeys for programs. So I use Mumble. I use Mumble a couple of times a week, and I really like being able to use push to talk. And Mumble on Wayland for the longest time has been terrible. That has been broken, really badly broken. And the Mumble devs, you go to their bug report. They've got a long-standing bug report about it, and they're sort of always of the opinion that, we'd like to fix it, but there's really not a good way to fix it. It actually works now if you go into... So, again, I'm running this on KDE on Fedora. If you go into the X11...
It's legacy X11 app support settings.
Thank you. There is a place there to say, okay, let my legacy apps snoop on the keyboard. And there's a couple of different options to be able to continue to make that secure so that you can give them some keyboard presses and not just everything. And that finally fixed that problem. Is there something better than that coming?
Actually, KDE is currently the only one that implements the better one, too. and that is the Global Shortcuts portal. An application can register its shortcuts with the compositor directly using the portal API for it.
Oh.
So that is actually a really great lead-in to Nate's blog post over at Pointed Stick, which is a reference to, I think we talked about this earlier briefly. It's a reference to that long-standing document, Wayland Breaks Everything, which in the early years of Wayland was a more fair point to make, although it was more getting at the idea that Wayland wasn't done and ready for prime time yet. Nate makes the point that Wayland does break everything in the respect that it's a different system. And he actually lays out this sort of new stack for programs to target. He calls it PW2, I think. It's Portals, Wayland, and Pipewire. I thought that was really, really interesting to kind of look at this and say, this is the Linux desktop going forwards, and this is what you should be targeting with your applications.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were starting to see it. I think there was a audio production tool that was Wayland only released just recently. Was it ProSonus or something like that? I forget what its name is. ProSonus. PreSonus.
PreSonus, yeah.
PreSonus. They released Studio One for Linux, I think is what it is.
Yeah, that sounds
and
right.
That requires, and that requires it to be a Wayland environment with Vulkan. You have to use it. Does not work on X11. We are getting our first Wayland only applications.
Very cool.
And it's very interesting that it's a closed source, sort of from the outside program like that.
Yeah. Well, there have been a few trivial ones that exist, or not trivial, I should say, small projects that have done Wayland only applications, but nothing that would be like commanding of interest and importance. Like the fact that a commercial vendor has been like, yep, this is Wayland only, and if you're on Ubuntu, this means you need to switch to Wayland now because it might not be on by default in your environment, and you can't use it on NVIDIA because your Ubuntu environment's so old that you don't have the ability to use Wayland on NVIDIA with the proprietary drivers properly, and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, there's but like I was surprised to see how soon that something like this came into existence, because I expected this to take 2 more years.
It's good for PreSonus for leading that charge, I guess.
Yeah,
they also make great audio hardware. PreSonus.
No, they're
not
very
that I'm
good.
on any, and they do really good Linux support as well.
Yeah, no, they're like the thing is that they're no joke. They're legitimately very well known and very well in demand, and they produce hardware and software that integrates well with each other. So like it is a testament to how good the stack is now that they were willing to do it back at commercially.
Yeah,
that's fair. All right. Well, hey, we are getting back to the bottom of the hour. We asked you last week about your favorite text editor and programming language. There is another question I like to ask guests.
Has it changed? That's the question.
Not in a week.
I bet it hasn't changed in a week. I'm curious, though, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen somebody do with a piece of your code or something that you've put together? This is sort of open-ended. So feel free to take it whatever direction you want to.
I think the weirdest thing I've seen it done is the weirdest thing is that probably I work on image building tools and stuff like that. So I get to some of it is like I make Linux appliance software. Mm-hmm. I think the weirdest thing I've seen is someone using the code that I've written to make an appliance image that has an appliance image nested inside of it that has a container nested inside of it.
Oh my God.
To run a series of applications with different levels of operating system compatibility. So like the container nested inside, and you need to run in an older operating system with an older runtime inside of another environment that had to have something that was a little bit newer, but not quite new enough. And then it was wrapped inside of an even newer environment because they wanted to have the latest kernel and latest functionality for their hardware platform. And yeah, that was bizarre.
Fun times.
And you can tell, like, this is where the commercial world is weird.
Yes. It's containers all the way down in that case. All right, Neal, it has been great having you once again. You've got a podcast. You want to plug that real quick?
Yeah, sure. So I am a co-host on the show Sudo Show, sudo.show, or tuxdigital.com/sudo show. All one word. And that will take you right to the site where you can see all the episodes and the show notes and stuff. We talk about the business of open source there, and we do, it's more, taking in the context of what's going on and turning it into something of a roundtable discussion type thing between myself and my two co-hosts, Brandon and Bill. And it's a lot of fun. Check it out. And stuff gets posted somewhat irregularly. It is the holidays; things are a little weird.
Yes,
but like normally we try to keep to at least like some kind of monthly cadence or whatever.
Okay.
But yeah, that's my podcast that I work on, and check it out. And my personal site also has like other references to stuff. You can go to neal.gompa.dev, which redirects to the domain royalgeekworld.com. Pick whichever one you want. It's fine. And you'll be able to find all my contact stuff there.
All right. Very cool. And then I believe we also have some show notes for you that have some of those links in it. We'll make sure we've got those tuned up for this week and get that posted over on Hackaday again. But thank you so much, Neal, for being here. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. What do you think, Dan? Have we talked you into trying Fedora 40 and KDE 6 and Pipewire yet?
Yeah, I'm interested. Well, Pipewire definitely, yeah. That's an easy sell, I think, for me. But I haven't used. I used Rawhide a few years ago, whatever the current version at the time, and I did used to use Fedora. So I actually started off on the RPM side of things, but I'm now more on the Debian side of things. But I'm agnostic. I like to move around. So yeah, I'm going to try it out. KDE has always been interesting to me. The first desktop I used was KDE. So maybe it's a trip back down memory lane.
Time to come back.
Things have changed a bit. Things have changed a bit in 20 years.
Yeah. Oh goodness, in 20 years, you would have been on what, KDE 3 way back then?
Yep.
Yeah.
Everything was done with Conqueror.
Yep.
Like, everything had to be done through Conqueror, like file management, web browsing. I don't know anything else. But I'd loved Amarok. I don't know if Amarok's still a thing. That was my favorite media player.
It is. Okay, so, weird trivia bit. I believe it is Conqueror that I'm thinking of. Part of the source code for Conqueror got ripped out, rebuilt by Google, and is now the heart of, I think it's Conqueror that is the heart of Chrome. It was one of the KDE browsers.
I think you're right. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's like the JavaScript runtime. When Google was looking to make a browser, they went looking for... I'm gonna unmute Neal so he can tell us. He's
gonna explode.
He's gesturing wildly from the side, and I'm gonna let him tell us the rest of the story here.
So, KHTML and KJS were the underpinnings of Conqueror's web rendering features. Those became Web Core and JS Core by Apple and became bundled as WebKit. WebKit then is the underpinnings of the Safari web browser, but WebKit was an open source project which then was used as the underpinnings for then Epiphany with WebKit GTK.
I remember Epiphany, yeah.
And of course Conqueror still with WebKit, Qt WebKit, and then Chromium, which takes WebKit and makes its own custom front end that was called Skia, and then that later evolved into a fork when Apple and Google couldn't agree on how to do sandboxed web processes, and the end result was WebKit 2 for Epiphany and Safari, and then WebKit got forked into Blink for Chromium, and so the Blink engine is actually a fork of WebKit, which is a fork of KHTML and KJS.
The entire world rests on top of Conqueror.
Yes, it does.
It does, yeah.
All right, thank you, Neal, for that interjection. Now get back out of here.
This is going to kick him out again.
Yeah, we'll meet him again. All right. Boy, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed having Neal. I'm glad we took him back to back. That was a lot of fun, and we'll have to bring him on sooner than 11 years from now.
Definitely.
Maybe when Fedora 40 actually comes out as stable, we'll have to have him back. That would be great.
That's a good idea.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, Dan, is there anything you want to plug before we close?
Not particularly. People can go to my website, danlynch.org, if you want to find any music or podcasts or other things that I'm involved with, and check it out. And I will update my blog, my long overdue blog, to reflect the fact that Floss Weekly, has, like a phoenix from the flames, has risen. Thanks to you, Jonathan, has risen again.
Well, thanks to me, and also thanks to Hackaday. We sure appreciate them giving us a home to come to. Which, speaking of which, if you would like to watch the show live as the sausage gets made, we do the recording every week right in the Hackaday Discord. We stream the audio and the video live. We've gone to the podcast download is audio only, but we do actually still stream the video stream there on the Hackaday Discord. I will try to get a link to that in the show notes for this week so that you can catch it next week if you want to. Speaking of which, next week we have Benny Vasquez, who is one of the driving leaders behind Alma Linux, which we've been talking about a lot here recently. We have scored. We'll be able to talk to Benny, and I am definitely looking forward to that. I'm not sure who's going to co-host that one yet, but it'll be great. I might see if I can get Doc to come to co-host that one. But that is what is up for next week. As far as following me, be sure to keep an eye on Hackaday, and the security column goes live every Friday morning, and that is always a lot of fun. Speaking of which, as soon as I get done editing this show, that's what I am off to work on. I just want to say thank you to everyone. Those that listened live, we did have a small handful. We're looking to grow that in the future. And everyone that downloads, we sure appreciate it. Make sure to let folks know that Floss Weekly is back. We didn't even miss an episode. We're back, and we're here at Hackaday. I don't think the RSS feeds are going to roll over. I think it's going to be you're going to need to subscribe to the new ones, but we are pushing it out everywhere. It's on Audible, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on all the places that you know to look for it. But it's been a great show. We sure appreciate you, and we will see you next week here on Floss Weekly.